terminology is something that always gets confusing. When you talk to someone that knows certain words for certain things, and then you talk to someone else who knows other words for the same things. Like, for example, I have people in my family that are from the UK. And when we talk about things like sausages, sometimes they refer to them as bangers. And potato chips are crisps, things like that. But when you talk to people at places like Marten, you got to talk to people who understand the right words for things. One of the biggest sources of confusion I have had up to this point, and one of my sources of frustrations, I might add, is that I was told in orientation, if you recall, that I was going to be a daily home driver. Well, this is not technically true. I am considered a regional driver, but the Walmart account, as they told us, is a little bit different. So we normally are out every day, and then we come home every day as a general rule. But they reserve the right to send us out, have us lay over, and then we come back. However, because I was told I was a daily driver, that became a source of confusion. And it came to a head this week, but not in a bad way. I was anticipating it being something that was going to be potentially bad, but it wasn't. It was actually surprisingly smooth. So this week, when I started on my Monday, I was issued a different truck. Now, this truck it's the same kind of truck. It's still a Kenworth T680, but it's a little bit different. This truck, for example, has, it doesn't, the passing, for example, when you try to double tap the gas pedal to get into the passing gear, it doesn't do that. It just sits there at 65. Also, it feels a little bit different. It feels like it's a little bit more powerful than the other one, even though you're not exceeding the same, governed speed limit of 65. There's a few things different. Like, one of the things I thought was actually really interesting that's the same is the rear drive tire on the outside right side. Whoever drove the last truck I had and this truck, that tire wears like they slammed on the brakes, and that one tire sits there and flattens, and then they continue to, and then whoever it is drives on it, and it kind of, goes out. And not goes out, but it kind of smooths over in time, so it doesn't look like it's been ground freshly. But very weird. So this is also one of those things where the glove compartment, they sent out a notification, fleet-wide notification, saying that that the DOT has been doing, checks, inspections. And one of the big things that's caught our drivers lately has been a lack of fuses, carrying the fuses to replace. And so the very first thing I did was I said, I'm going to double check the fuses are there. I reached for the glove compartment, and there's no handle. The handle had completely broken off, and I tried my best to open that thing, but it would not open. So I went to the office and said, hey, do y'all have any extra fuses? And they were like, well, we'll look. And they weren't able to find any. They ordered some. So by the time you see this, I will have probably had them for over 3 months. Or at least in that truck. That was technically not a truck I should have been in. The truck, I'm supposed to be alternating between two trucks, and I'll explain why, actually. But the truck I was supposed to be in had recently come back from maintenance because they had to order a specialty part. Now, I inquired again as to why we couldn't do a 5.2 on me. Why do I have to do a 5.2, 5.3? And it was explained. And at first I didn't understand it, but as soon as he explained it, it's actually quite brilliant from the perspective of the employer. It's not necessarily as good from the perspective of the employees, unless you like to have the extra day off. But the guaranteed pay does go down a little bit. And it means you're also not given a truck your slip seat. And the reason that you are slip seat is completely coincides with the fact that you have different trucks. Like, for example, I go to work for 5 days. Okay. Then I have 2 days off for a total of 7 days in a work cycle. Then I go to work for 5 days. Now we're a total of 12 days. Then I'm off for 3 days. So now we're a total of 15. So that means over the course of 15 days, I work 10 days. Okay. 10 days over 2 trucks. in that same cycle, 3 other drivers and me would work 10 days. So that's a total of 30 days, right? So I would be in one truck for 5 days, another truck for 5 days, and 2 other drivers do the exact same thing. So each one of us are actually sharing 2 trucks. So when I do my 5 days in a truck, I go home and another driver will take that same truck. Let's call this truck 1. We'll take truck 1 for the next 5 days. Then a second driver, that's not me, will take it for the next 5 days. And then it goes back to me because remember, I have 5 days off. So those 10 days that they have between me, I'm here, and then another driver comes in. I'm home these 2 days of their cycle, and then I work these 3 days, and then I work these 2 days too, and then I'm off those 3 days. So, but I will cycle in and out of 2 different trucks with 2 other drivers. So it's actually quite brilliant, if that makes sense. It basically staggers. So we basically follow each other. I go 5 days after someone and someone else goes 5 days after me. And so we can't be in the same truck at the same time. So we'll end up, kind of tag teaming them and jumping aboard. Now, the reason why this is actually brilliant from a company perspective is that if you issue someone a truck, it would only be used maybe 5 or 6 days a week. And there's going to be one day that's down. If you are buying that truck, it's going to still, it's not being used for one of those days. So therefore, you're still paying for it. If you're paying for it out of pocket, if you pay for it outright, it's still something that's depreciating. You can only depreciate at a certain rate. You want to use your company resources constantly and effectively. If you move a truck every single day, that's one of the reasons why companies love team drivers, because team drivers will basically, like, if I was in a team with someone, I'd say, okay, I'm going to log off and, next person starts their shift. So I do a post-trip while they do a pre-trip. And then we say, well, let me just, run in here, go to the restroom. And then I jump in the sleeper and the other person drives. And then I go to sleep while they drive. And then we trade off the next day. And the truck constantly moves. That's why people love team drivers. But in this account, we're out and back in usually the same day. So when it comes down to utilizing resources, this is extremely effective when you have someone that's out and back in. And you can't necessarily have someone that takes the truck out and then brings it back 12 hours later and someone else jumps in it and takes it out for 12 hours, because quite often we are out for longer than 12 hours. We'll be out our full 14 or close to it. And then you'd have someone else sitting around tapping their foot saying, bring the truck back. I got to get out here with my load. So it's quite effective the way it is. But this truck, the difference between this Kenworth and the previous Kenworth, I mentioned a couple of things that did not work as well. One thing that I did appreciate more is that the OmniTrack system, which is still god-awful in my opinion, seemed to allow me to do map-related stuff while driving. Now, it doesn't mean I'm driving down the road, sitting there tapping the thing constantly and going into it. No, but when you come to a stop on the old truck, you would have to sit there and stop. And then 15 or 20 seconds later, the map would, if I hit the home button, it would be in the lock mode. And so it would say, nope, you can't access anything. And then I could click where to and go into my menu or hit dispatch, something like that. So if I came to a stop at a stop sign, I would have to sit there for 15 or 20 seconds before I could do anything. And if there's a person behind me, they're not going to suffer that. They're not going to deal with that at all. So you could not do that on that old truck. But in this truck, I was able to come to a stop at a stop sign, hit the home button, hit dispatch, hit the thing, and then hit get route, and it took all of 2 or 3 seconds. And it's the amount of time it would take me to basically watch another car cross in front of me, and then now it's my turn to go. And then it would say calculating route or calculating route, it says, and then it would take me out. So to me, it was a lot more effective, a lot more efficient. And it probably has additional features you could do too. Like you could probably find a fuel stop or something like that along the way. But since I'm in Georgia, I know all the fuel stops, in this area. By now I've driven from where I am out 20, up 85, and up 75. I know where those fuel stops are. And there's the one, the god-awful pilot at Boulder Crest, which is right across corner around the corner from Schneider, but it's always packed. It's always crazy. So you don't go there. But I know that the fuel stops around Georgia that are the pilots and Flying J's. So I don't really technically need, at this point, I've been on this account for about a month, almost a month. And so I know where the fuel stops are. I know the exit numbers. I could go from like 114 to 138, and then there's one at 172, and then 192, I believe, something like that. And then if you're going up 85, there's one at 160, 166. I mean, you know where they are. You know which exits you need to stop at. And if you cross over one of those roads, you can say, oh, I'm going to be closer to the one at 166 than I would be at the one at 129. You understand things over the course of time. So anyway, it's one of those things where you kind of get used to your account. You get used to things. One thing I've gotten pretty good at is knowing if I'm going to go over a weigh station. I don't want to take the risk. A couple of weeks ago, if you recall, I got a load. It was overweight. So I tried to slide my tandems and the trailer didn't slide. The Walmart trailer needed work on it and it was busted. It was not going to slide. So I had to have it transloaded, which was really annoying. But ended up being that by the time I crossed over that weigh station, it was closed. But I know very, very well that if I was overweight, I was going to go over that and it would have tripped the scale. They would have opened. I mean, it would have been opened at that point when I went over it, but it wasn't a few hours later. So it's just one of those things that happens, On the note of being overweight, this week, well, I'll tell you this in a second. I was going, my Monday, I went from Atlanta to Spartanburg, South Carolina, and then to Greenville, South Carolina. And then on the way back, it was only the 2 stops. And on the way back, I went by Gillsville, which is the eggs place that I just take the trailer by there and drop it off and pick up a loaded one and then go back. Now, I still had hours left. So they went ahead and sent me on a backhaul, another one locally, which was to General Mills. So I picked up pretty close to the Walmart DC, and then I went to General Mills and picked up. But the biggest thing that frustrated me is that when I started my week, I like to start my week, late in the evening. So technically like 9 or 10 p.m. I set my time for 9 p.m. And the thing that frustrated me is they didn't send me a job that was going to be available until 2:45 a.m. Well, when I go to sleep, I set my time, my clock. I back it up. I know that if I'm going to drive overnight, I need a full 7 hours of sleep, or at least schedule it that way. And sometimes I might get up in the middle of the night and roll around or go to the restroom, something like that, and go back to bed. But usually I set it for that amount of sleep because that's where I'm going to be good. But when I got up, I was pretty well rested. I got up a couple of times, tossed and turned and flipped around a little bit and then went back to sleep. But when I got up at 8 o'clock, I was very well rested. So I was not going to be able to get back to sleep. I look at the app and it says, be there at, this load leaves at like 2:46 a.m. I'm like, so at this point, I am quite frustrated. Well, I should say technically I didn't have a load at that point. So I called them. The very first thing that happened is I called them and said, I don't have a load on my app. And they said, oh, well, we'll get you one. And then they sent me one. And the one they sent me was a leave at 2:46 a.m. So I called up and I said, wait a minute, that's like in almost 6 hours. And they're like 5.5 hours. And they're like, yeah, so you can go back to sleep. I'm like, I'm not going to be able to go back to sleep. I just rested very well. I'm very disciplined in my sleep. So I'm like, I'm not going to be able to go back to sleep. So I'm going to be up, tossing and turning, whatever, for the next 5.5 hours before I come in. And that's, 5.5 hours after I was supposed to be there. Because if I was starting at 9, I'm not going to be able to leave until 2:46. I could probably get there at 2:30 and they'll be ready, maybe even 1:30. But I was like, is this the best thing for me? And they're like, well, you can just come in later and sleep late. I'm like, I can't do that though. Can you find me anything that's a little better utilization of someone that's starting early? And they said, okay, let's see what we can do. And, we'll talk to the planner. And they went away And then I saw that job get removed. And then another one showed up, which was like a 1 something. So it was still 4.5 hours after I was wanting to get out of there. So anyway, I had no choice but to linger around and, goof off and whatever. I was not happy about that, because if you start 4 hours after you're expected, it's going to be a 14-hour day. You're working 18 hours. You're going to be tired by the end. As opposed to getting up, being disciplined about things and working up to 14 hours and going home and being tired, but not being like, cross-eyed. So, anyway, did that day, finished up at General Mills. One of the things that really frustrated me about that particular day is when I got to the General Mills, there was a long line. And I waited in the line it took about half an hour because, their system to get in is automated. So you have to go up to the kiosks and you have to enter all the data. And then it has to take its sweet time to text you stuff after it verifies things. In the meantime, you can't go through the security gate, and other people can go through behind, and go through the kiosk too, but it's just going to take its sweet time to let you in. Now, once I got in, I was able to do my post trip on that trailer, pick up the new one, do a pre-inspection, that kind of thing. And then I got to the security gate. By the time I waited for all the other trucks to get through and up to the front, I was the very next one. By then it was 1:30 p.m. And I'm looking forward to just getting on the road, because it was only like, 11 miles or whatever it is from the DC. And I'm waiting and waiting and waiting. And then a driver in the next truck over in the next lane, he gets out and starts to walk around, and the lady inside, she exits, and the guy says, "Hey, I'm ready to leave." And she says, "Well, I'm on lunch break." I'm on lunch break. Apparently on the weekends, well, at least on that particular day, that was a weekend. When they go on lunch, they just go on lunch. And they got to call it sometime when all the trucks are lined up and going in and out. So they just go on lunch. There was nobody there to cover her. So when she left, she left. And we were sitting there twiddling our thumbs. This other guy already had his paperwork and stuff. All she had to do is press the button and let him out. But she wouldn't do that. She's like, "I'm on lunch. I'm not working on my lunch break." He's like, "But I'm ready to go." And she's like, "Yeah, well, when I get back, I'll buzz you out." He's like, "Well, I'm going to go ahead and leave." She says, "You can't until I buzz you out." So that was not a very good experience there, sitting there twiddling my thumbs, waiting to get out the gate. As soon as she was back, because she told me the time she was going to be back, and it was 3 minutes after that she came out with my paperwork and handed it to me, and then I was gone. So basically, they wasted they wasted however long it was for me and the next person over and stuff like that, wasted all of our time, a bunch of drivers, and this is a backhaul. So my clock is ticking and it's going down. I had already at that point been on the road or had already been working for over half a day when that started. So when I got back to the DC and did my post trip and stuff and got back in, I only had like 15 minutes left on my clock. I was really hoping to pull my clock back and not start the next day at 2 p.m. or 2 a.m. But anyway, so that was a bit frustrating. But that was at least, that day was done. The next day, I was sent a short run where it started at, I believe it was, I think it was at 2 a.m. again. So it was going from there to Morrow, Georgia, and then back. It was just dropping off and unloading the entire trailer. And it was a Walmart, not a Sam's Club or a neighborhood market. And then when I got back, they gave me a run out to Thompson and then Grovetown. And that was another one. It was not a frozen and dairy, or was it? It was a frozen dairy. But by the time I got out to Thompson, it was right at, they said, you can't get there before 9 a.m. And I said, don't worry about that. Because I think I got back there, and by the time I was in the office turning in everything, I think it was like 7:30 No, it was 6:30. Whatever time it was, I remember looking at it and plugging in the mileage and the GPS telling me, and it was going to be. And I remember thinking to myself, if I end up going needing extra time or to linger before 9 a.m., then what I would do is there's a rest area before that exit. So I would go ahead and pull off there, because by then in the morning, there's going to be trucks. There's going to be trucks that have pulled out. So I'll have room to pull in. And there's also a fuel stop on the way. So if I need to, I can stop there. But you still have to travel through some of the state and U.S. back roads in order to get there. So I knew that those are going to go slower. And because I'm going to be doing it in daytime, sometimes this one turn that you pull off of 78 and you make a left turn onto, I think it's 11, maybe it's 10, I think it's 11. At that point, sometimes you can't make that left turn for a few minutes. So anyway, by the time I was headed out there, I was like, you know what? I'll probably get there right around 9. So as I got close in the last half a mile, I knew that it was 8:52. And I was like, you cannot pull in before 9. So what I did is I pulled over into one of those turning lanes that pulls into a business that I noticed was closed. And so I pulled on there, put on my hazards, and sat there for 4 minutes. Then I pulled back out. I hit the road and slowly drove down the road. Luckily missed the light. So I had to sit there and wait for it. I made the left turn and I pulled into the Walmart's parking lot at 9:01. By the time I got to the back, it was and lined up and was starting to back in. It was 9:02. So I was definitely, outside of the time frame. I did the entire drop there in Thompson. Then I went to Grovetown. It was just those two, and I was good. I was done. And then I got back, and at this point, I think it had been a 13-hour day. So I could start the next day at 1. Now, I looked at when I got back, I saw I was already pre-assigned. So I already looked at the pre-trip, and it already had 2 jobs in there. One of them was going from where I was in Monroe to Pickens to Easley. These are in South Carolina. And then back, and then it was to take me to Niagara. And because this was a weekday now, I was not going to be able to get to Niagara and back, because that in no traffic takes over 5 hours. By the time you get to a Walmart, you drop off a loaded trailer, you do your post-trip, you pick up the new trailer. By the time you go inside and get them to sign the paperwork, and you get out there and you pre-trip the truck and you swap everything over and you slide the tandems and you get down there to Niagara and you go through their security system and you drop off the trailer, you pick up the trailer, you go through their security and go through their kiosk and whatever else. And by the time you get out of there and drive back the 2 hours with a fully loaded trailer that goes very slow and sluggish, it's going to be over 5 hours easily. And so I was looking at this thinking, I can't make this. So at this point, I'm talking to the person on the phone, and I said, I can't, why was I sent this? And they said, you're going to have to talk to a planner. I said, can you transfer me to the planner? And they said, sure. And I talked to the planner, and she said, and I said, I'm daily home. Why was, I can't make this. She says, that's not what's on my screen. I said, what do you mean? She says, I see you as dedicated, or as dedicated regional. And I said, yeah, but I was told I was daily home in orientation. And she said, well, that's not what's on my screen. And, so you'll have to talk to the manager about that. Well, this is one of those things where at this point, I was like a little bit, I was frustrated about this because at this point, I had been sent a few of these jobs that I was just like, that's going to be a tight spot, getting back in time. That's going to be really, and I've always gotten back except that very first week on my Friday, that after being out 4 days, I was sent to Niagara. It's always Niagara that strands me. Anyway, so when I got that pre-assignment right before I started my day it was actually technically Tuesday. It was my Tuesday. So I finished up and I said, I can't do this. I was already pre-assigned. And that's when they put me onto the planner. And the planner said, well, when you come in tomorrow, talk to the manager. I said, okay. So I went off and did, and I said, I can do another one. She asked if I could do, go to, I think it was Eatonton, and then to go to General Mills. I said, yeah, I could do that. That's not a problem. Because it's all away from Atlanta, like from Monroe. If you go this direction, you go towards Atlanta. And that's going to be bad. But if you go this way, you're going away from Atlanta and there's no traffic, or there's little traffic. So I could make that one. So by the time I got to, I did my overnight stuff, Pickens easily, went back in. It was still early. So he wasn't in yet. So I went ahead and got ready, and I went to Eatonton. I traded out my trailer. I then went to General Mills. I did that whole thing. There was nobody there that day. It was a nice day. So it was smooth sailing through security. And by the time I got back, I was, like I said before, I was fully expected there to be a pushback from the manager saying, no, I don't care what you say and whatever. But when I went to him, I greeted him and I said, hey, I was led to believe in orientation that I'm a daily home driver. And he wasn't looking at me. When I went in there and greeted him, he was looking at his computer the whole time. I'm like, he's not even giving me the time of day. It ends up that he was kind of just, I guess he was looking at something and just bringing up something. But anyway, when I told him that I'm daily home, he says, no, you're dedicated regional. He said, we get you home most days, but occasionally we'll send you out farther and we need you to stay overnight. And I, again, have not talked about a lot of my own personal situations here on this channel, but there's a couple of reasons as to why I can't at this time. I mean, when I was doing OTR, that was my dedicated thing. I knew I was going to be out and that. But when I was told I was home daily, I made alternate plans. I made a different life choice and life decision that led me to needing to be home every day, or it's going to be a little disruptive. Now, I think I told you in the past, the truck is not the most comfortable thing, and moving into the truck for a few days is not something I want to do, because I can't bring in creature comforts and whatever. And if I'm going to go home every day, then it's just not going to be, I'm going to have to take things to and from every single day to make sure I have it at home when I need it. Not normally a big deal, but in my case, it's more of a big deal without getting into details. So when I told him and he kind of explained it, I said, well, what does it take to be, because he said, I do have drivers that are home daily. And I said, well, what does it take to be a home daily driver? And he explained it to me. Basically, the guaranteed pay goes down about $150, but I'm not a minimal guy. So I'm not going to just do the bare minimum and then call it there and say, okay, well, let me just get my guaranteed pay. I don't mind working my entire thing and doing debt back calls and doing whatever else, and work me if you want to work me. And I don't mind working hard and making money and stuff. And that's what I'm here doing. That's what I'm doing this for, is to make money. So I was like, I'm not worried about guaranteed pay. I'm not a minimal guy and going to just, kind of, take it easy and wait for the guaranteed pay to hit and say, yay, I got my money. And it's a bare minimum. And he's like, yeah, I know. And so I said, it's just, and so anyway, I kind of explained the situation in so many ways, and he understood. He said it's at his discretion to change someone to home daily. And so I said, to the circumstances, I would like to be home daily. And he said, okay, I can swap you over to that as long as you understand that everything is the same except the guaranteed pay. And I said, well, this is when I found out about the 5253 and how it worked. I said, so if I'm going to be home daily, is it possible to get on a 5-2? And he just kind of smiled and shook his head. And that's when I'm like, that's when I was like, I don't understand, and that's when he said, well, let me explain it to you. And then as soon as he did, I was just kind of like, surprisingly brilliant. I mean, it's a good utilization. I even told him, I said, that's a good utilization of company resources. And he told me that they're not going to be hiring any more 5-2 drivers anymore. And as a matter of fact, as employees leave, they're not going to be, even if they come back, they're not going to be a 5-2. They'll be a 5-2-5-3. And at some point, who knows, they may even tell all the drivers, you're going to be changing over to a 5-2-5-3. As they are, that is very much something that I can imagine a company doing. So anyway, the next 2 days, I didn't have backhaul. Well, okay. Thursday I didn't. I was sent from Monroe to Waynesboro, which is south of Augusta. And then from there, I was sent to Statesboro, 2 places in Statesboro. And it was like 300 and some odd miles. But it was also a bit, because it was a longer, and some of it, once you get to Augusta and you go on the interstates, that's full speed limit 65. But once you hit the U.S. interstates or the U.S. highways and the state highways, it goes slower. It goes down to like 45 and 55. Occasionally you'll hit 65, but for the most part, it's 45 and 55. And I told you, I set my cruise control for the speed limit. So it will, when you go down a hill, it'll go a little bit faster. And then when you go up a hill, it'll go a little bit slower. But I always have my jakes enabled. So that way I can make sure that it doesn't ever exceed, couple over, speed limit or whatever. At the most it ever hits is 4 over. But when it starts hitting that high, I usually will put the brakes on gently because I don't want to go 4 over. But that particular day, my Thursday, it was a little bit, I don't want to say slow, but the places I went were dragging their feet a little bit. And I was trying to light some fires under them and get moving. And they were just like, yeah, the person that normally does the produce and meat isn't here. Let me see if I can find someone that can help. And, the first place I actually went to, the Waynesboro, they were having an issue with their refrigeration. They ended up, not their freezers and the refrigerators in the back, but the front, when you're in a store, you go up and you look at everything that's in the back and the coolers that are back there. And then there's these floor things that stand out with aisles all the way around it on 4 sides. And you can look down in there and there's food you can pick up and whatever. It keeps everything cool inside there. And then there's the upright cabinets that you can walk down between and get ice cream or whatever. Well, and they're backed up so that way you can access it from either side. Well, those and the consoles, not the consoles, but the things that you reach into and pull stuff right out without having to go through a glass or anything like that, those were out. So all of their team was all hands on deck trying to cover things up with blankets, move things into the back, and they were in trouble. It was raising, and they had to constantly keep the temperatures in check, as he says. They had just lost like $38,000 worth of food the week before, I guess was something similar. And he's like, I don't want to lose more food. And not only is it wasteful, but they constantly check the temperatures. And if things get out of the temperature range, they can't sell it. They're not going to. It's an FDA thing, and it's also a Walmart policy. So they're not going to sell something if it has not been kept at the proper temperature. You may say, well, it's produce. They can just put it out there and have it sit at room temperature. Well, if that is your standard, then yes. Like some things, once fruit hits the shelves, yes. Meat isn't that way. So they were trying to save as much product as they could. And he said, I'm not going to be able to unload you for probably an hour and a half or something like that. And so I called the office and I said, should I go ahead and go down, even though it means shifting things around, should I go ahead and go down to Statesboro and do the 2 drops and then come back? And they said, well, we'll message Walmart and see what they want to do. Well, then the manager of that location was like, let me show you what I'm talking about. And so since I was standing around anyway waiting on Walmart, he takes me around and shows me how some of the coolers were in the red. And he's like, this isn't good. So we don't have any food in this right now. We've taken it all out and we've moved it into other coolers, or it's wrapped in thermal blankets. I'm like, yeah, that is a problem. He's like, yeah, we're trying to get somebody here to fix it, but it's the middle of the night. Anyway, he walked into the room and there was one of his team leaders who was there, and he said, hey, and he said, what's the status? And the guy said, well, we've done this and this and this. And he said, what you up to right now? He says, I'm not doing anything. He kind of implied that there was more cooks in the kitchen than they needed to have. So it was kind of, people were on top of each other. So he and a few other guys weren't able to participate because there was too many people in that area. He says, well, if you're available, you want to offload this semi, because there was coolers that I could go into, that my stuff could go into, the meat and produce. Those coolers in the back were fine. It was just some of the other ones weren't. And so he said, sure. So he unloaded me. I was only sitting there waiting for 30 minutes. And then from there, I went to Statesboro. And by the time I got back, I only had 2 hours and change left on my clock because Statesboro had a couple of delays too where they were slow. And by the time I got back, I only had 2 hours and some odd cents left, 2 hours and change left. So I pulled my start time back for the next day, my Friday. I was able to pull it back all the way to 10 a.m. Now, by my Wednesday, because I went in at 1 a.m. on my Monday. I'm sorry, 2 a.m. on my Monday, 2 a.m. on my Tuesday, 1 a.m. on my Wednesday, 11 a.m. on my Thursday, and then I was able to start my Friday at 10 a.m. I'm sorry, 10 p.m. So 2 a.m., 2 a.m., 1 a.m., 11 p.m., and 10 p.m. So I was happy about that. It wasn't 9, but you know what? I'm going to count my blessings where they are. So anyway, that particular day, it was going up to Clayton, which is in Georgia, and then Franklin, which is in North Carolina, and then Blairsville, Georgia. Now, it was barely over 300 miles, not an issue. However, it's going through Franklin, North Carolina is right on the outskirts of the Great Smoky Mountains, and driving from Clayton to Franklin and Franklin to Blairsville takes you through some mountains, takes you through some hills, especially from Franklin to Blairsville. I mean, it literally, you could go from here straight down on highway, but the GPS was routing me around this way. I have no idea why, but I was like, do I want to trust my own GPS truck map, or do I want to trust the company GPS? I'm like, I'm going to trust the company GPS because I have a dedicated backhaul going to the egg place in Gillsville again. So I said, I'm not going to be able to get another backhaul anyway. I'm going to go ahead and go with the company GPS. So I went ahead and did that. And so I went around, which added 40 miles because my other GPS was saying it's 80 point something miles. Going their way, it was 119.8. Whatever. Maybe it was because it was faster. I don't know. The Schneider GPS did the same thing. Sometimes it would route me someplace because it would go on interstates, or sometimes it would route me more direct paths that were on back roads, but it was speed limit 55, but it would cut between interstates or something like that. So I don't really understand the procedure and it almost looks like the OmniTrack system takes into consideration sometimes some traffic. I'm guessing. It gives me that impression because sometimes it routes me to the same place one way, and sometimes it routes me to the same place a different way. Not 100% sure as to what the method to the madness is, but I went with it. I'm going to go with it. So anyway, I drove through the edge of drove through the Nantahala National Forest. In the middle of the night, it's, there's signs that say beware bears and stuff like that. But there's a lot of, wildlife on the side of the road. I keep seeing them there, and they have so far, knock on wood, not jumped out in front of me or crossed in front of me. The only animals that have crossed in front of me has been a possum that I think I told you about that was in the last video that ran out and sat there in the middle of the road, just sitting there looking at me. And as I was approaching, I slowed down a little bit, and then I was going to go right over top of him, and I did. And I looked at my rear view, but the blind spot to the truck is directly back in the middle, and he was in the middle of the lane. So if I hit him, sorry. If I didn't, he was probably like, whoa, look at this truck that went by. And it's not like a Cascadia or an International that's this far off the ground where it's trying to be aerodynamic. The T680 is a little bit higher off. So anyway, well, that was my Friday. By the time I got back from Gillsville, I was cutting through there. I had to go out of my route about 12 miles to fuel up and then coming back down. I take that back. It was 13 miles north, and then it was going back down south 11 miles to the exit that it normally has me go at exit 149 in Georgia on 85 to take the back road to get to the DC. From where I was, it was off of exit 149. It was going to have me go farther south toward Buford and then cut over. But since I had to go north to fuel up, that was going to be the closest route. It was going to take me on the back road that normally wants me to take when I'm coming in from the north, so it was fine. By the time I got back to the DC, though, it was and I had, that reefer that I picked up there with the eggs in it, there was a little bit of a delay because by the time I got to the egg place, they weren't in yet. So I had to wait for them. And then by the time they got I had already done my drop. I had already dropped it off there. I knew I was going to, and I post-tripped and everything. So when they got in, they gave me the paperwork. He told me where the trailer was. I just had to pre-trip it and then leave with it. I fueled up. And then when I got back, it was less than half a tank on fuel. So I fueled up the reefer, parked it. And then that's when I did a post-trip and everything. And then I post-tripped the trailer or the truck and finished things up. And I had like an hour and 45 minutes left on my clock, not enough time to do anything else. Well, another thing, when I was talking to the manager on my Wednesday, I told him that on that particular day, I had picked up 4 trailers and 2 of them had big chunks out of the tires. And he kind of gave me a look, and I told him about the wear spot on the rear of the T680 I was driving. And so I said, I can show you if you want to see it. And he came out there and looked at it and says, yeah, it's exactly what it is. Someone slammed on their brakes and then and it ground down that one area down to less than 2 mils, because the whole tire was probably down to like 4 or 5, 30 seconds. And 2 is the maximum they'll let you go on a drive tire. So, and it was below that in a couple of areas. And I kept thinking I was going to go over the scales, and when it happened to go over and check the tread depth, it was going to check it in that one little spot, and I knew I was going to get pulled in. And so, and being that on the truck, the fuses were inside the glove box that I couldn't get open, and if I was pulled in for a level 1 inspection, I would be yanking that thing open, even if it meant breaking it, to pull out those things to avoid a fine and to keep our CSA scores from going up higher. So, believe me, I would have torn that thing right off if I needed to and open up the glove compartment. But anyway, so what the manager did is he contacted their people, their guy that goes out on the road and does repairs. And he said he's going to be in our lot, in our yard, doing some repairs on trucks. He'll have him come by and repair my tires. So he did. And they were some nice, hefty, thick, brand new, a lot of tread tires. I was like, oh, this is great. Anyway. One other thing that happened that was kind of fun. When I was going to, when was it? It might have been my Wednesday when I was going up to South Carolina. They gave me a load. And that load, when I looked at it, I said, it is gonna be borderline weight-wise. Because it was a heavy load, but they also didn't load it 40, 30, 40 in the temperatures, which means produce at the front and rear and meat in the middle, which is usually meat's heavier than the produce. So it's going to be better for balancing the trailer between the drive and the trailer tires. So, in this one, it was another one of those where the meat was all on one side of the trailer. So when I looked at this, I said, oh gosh, I'm going to go through the scales that we have at the DC, and it's going to show me that I'm overweight. And I pulled up there, and when I went over, it showed like 25,000 and change on the drives. And when I pulled up and pulled the trailer tires over, it ended up being 35,600, something like that. And I remember looking at this and saying, no, I take that back. That wasn't the day. It might have been the day I was going to Waynesboro and Statesboro. I can't remember. But what I remember, no, now that I think about it, it might have been my afternoon run to Thompson and Grovetown. I think that's what it was, actually, now that I think about it. Because I remember looking at it saying, if I'm going to go over the scales in this, I'm going to go ahead and slide the tandems. But if I'm not going to go over the scales, then I'm not going to slide the tandems, because that takes additional time. And by that point, now that I remember it correctly, yes, this is my second load of the day. And I remember I brought up the GPS, and it said I was going to be pulling off a few exits before the scale. So I said, okay, I'm not going to slide the tandems. It's only a little bit more overweight on the rear. But anyway, so I headed out there, and staying sharp, thinking it's going to be my luck. They're going to have just opened up some new scales that no one has ever seen before. They're just going to open up and miraculously it's going to be right there. But no, there was no new scales. It was none of that. It was just another day. So I drove out there and I did my drops and everything was good. This is a new week. I'm going to be starting a new week soon. So what I'm curious about is the company going to baby me now? Because Thursday and Friday, I only had one load each day. Granted, one of those days I had the backhaul built in, but those were both over 300 miles a day. And most of the time when I get a backhaul, I usually will have under 300 miles. So I don't know if that's like the magic number, but it also could mean that, if you drive in the North Georgia mountains or something like that, then you're going to have to go slower. You're going to be going through, if you like the other one where I was going from Augusta on back roads, it was going to go slower. So they probably take into things consideration wise like that, because I'm not the first person doing these routes. But it's going to be one of those things where I will have to see, because today I have a pre-assignment and it's going, I can't remember where it is now, but it's for my load on my Monday. And it is leaving. So I'll be going in at 9 p.m. and it says it's first come, first serve. So I guess that means if I show up at 9, I can leave with it. And if I can get out of there, that means I will, I think it's just under 300 miles because it's a weekend. I'm hoping I can get everything offloaded and stuff back and maybe do a quickie over to General Mills or something like that. The jobs I really like is when I drop off a trailer and then bring back a pallet load. That's one of the ones I did at some point this last week. I think it was. Where I pulled up, I brought him a full trailer and I said, "Do you have any empties?" And the guy kind of looked at me and was like, and I said, "Do you have any pallets?" He said, "Oh, I have 2 pallets, 2 trucks full of pallets." And so, I said, "I'll take one of those." And I brought it back and dropped it off. So he was happy to give me that one. I think it was this last week. Might have been the week before. But anyway, so we'll see what happens. I like driving overnight. I like the fact that I'll be starting at 9 p.m. So it'll be maximum night driving. And it means I won't be doing a frozen and dairy in the morning. So if I can get everything done, because I have no Sam's Club or neighborhood markets, if I can get everything done and get back, I have a chance to get a back haul and get things done and will be in a position to set myself up for 9 p.m. on my Tuesday. So we'll see what happens. But I'm glad that the manager and I were able to, I'm glad that he was able to work with me. That's something I really appreciate. Marten's a big company. And it was the biggest thing that was frustrating to me is the misunderstanding, not understanding, I guess, proper terminology, because I was told you're daily home, but then I was hired as a dedicated and was said, "No, you're technically dedicated, but you're daily home or if we can get you there." So anyway, it was logistics and it was terminology. And the manager even kind of laughed and said, "Yeah, these are people that don't understand our business and the way we do things. And they may say your daily home, but they don't know the exact, account. They don't know that most of the time you are, but you're not technically." So, and when he told me it was at his discretion, I said, "Well, is it possible for me?" And he says, "Well, let's talk about this." And that's when he told me the thing about the guaranteed pay going down. The only thing that I've noticed is that when I got paid, my take home was about $250 less than it normally is, about $175 to $250 less. I can't remember. Depends on where it is compared to my previous checks. I don't think that's because my work was any different. I was busting my tail this last week. I felt like I did more miles and more this time than I had done the previous weeks. And I don't think it has anything to do with the fact, because the rates are still paid on the same on my stub. I don't know if my detention went down. I don't know if I were to guess, it counts from a Tuesday, I think Tuesday to the previous Monday or Wednesday to the previous Tuesday, something like that, in that cycle. I think what happened is my slip seat jumped me back and I had 2 days as opposed to 1 day, or maybe it was 3 days. in that gap as opposed to 2 days, whatever it was. I think it might have been counting less of my days. Or I don't know, because that would only be for guaranteed pay. I don't know exactly what it is. I'm going to have to look at what happens this next pay cycle, because I still busted my tail. I still got a lot of miles down compared to previous weeks. I still did my miles, even without doing back hauls on Tuesday and Wednesday. I still did one Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. I did General Mills twice, and I did a second run on my Tuesday. So I did a back haul on Monday, in addition to the eggs place on the way back, a second back haul run. And then I did the Morrow run with the Thompson Grovetown, and then I did the regular run, and then the General Mills on Wednesday, and then Thursday and Friday was just each day was a longer run of like 300 plus miles. So we'll see what happens, because I don't want them to just baby me and say, well, you can do a 9-hour day. You can do a 10-hour day. If there's something that can get me another 3 or 4 hours, use me. So anyway, that's the latest. Happier, more optimistic going into this next week, because I know I'll be home daily, and that will work well with my family situation, my home situation, and what I have going on. And I'm starting on 9 p.m. at 9 p.m. So that's good. Happiness. Thanks for watching.